Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. So we are now at the end of Southern September. If you guys do not know, I had originally designated September as a month to read some Southern literature that had been sitting on my TBR for a while, and I did do that. It didn't go quite the way I expected just because of some family stuff, but I started off on a very positive note reading March by John Lewis, all 3 volumes. Absolutely loved it. I have a review somewhere that I'll link. Then I read Let Us Now Praise Famous Men by James Agee, which was a little bit of a mixed bag for me. It was a book that I ended up admiring more than I liked. So that was kind of like middle of the road, 3-star kind of book for me. Then I DNF'd my third pick for it, which was Love in the Ruins by Percy. So I kind of just did like a short little joint review of that in my What I'm Reading Right Now for September video, just because I didn't feel like I had enough to say about either of those to merit a full video. And then we come to the topic of this particular video, which is Go Set A Watchman by Harper Lee. So this is my 4th pick and the 4th book I read for Southern September, so I did complete my TBR. And I would say that this was another kind of mixed bag, but a more positive mixed bag than Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. So what I'm going to do is I am going to leave this to be spoiler free because I think that there's enough people out there who are curious about, like, should I risk reading it, that I want to give you a sense of at least what my opinion on that is without getting into too many spoilers. So I'm going to leave this spoiler free, but I just wanted to give you kind of my overall thoughts and impressions of this, and then maybe do a little bit of like overall thoughts about Southern September in general. If you do not know, Go Set A Watchman has kind of an interesting history. Essentially, this was sort of like round 1 of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, which is an iconic book, certainly in American literature, but I think also just in literature writ large around the world. It's a very well-known book, and it's a very beloved book. So for example, at least in the American South, which is, you know, where I was schooled, it's a book that pretty much everybody read, either in late middle school to early high school. It's a book that I've not met many people who didn't like it. Even if they didn't think it was perfect or they have some issues with it, it's a hard book not to at least like because the writing is so strong. It's, I would say, probably the most successful child narrator I've ever encountered in a book, because I think that can be a really tricky line for authors to walk, especially in non-young adult literature. To try to put adults in the head of a child, I think that can be kind of a tricky project, and I think that Harper Lee does that really effectively in the book. Really what it's about is a child's perspective on her own father's responses to systemic racism in segregationist Alabama in the first half of the 20th century. So it's a really compelling book, and one of the criticisms that it has had is that it kind of valorizes this noble white man who's coming in to try to save this poor, sort of like noble black man. That's been a critique of it, but Atticus Finch in that book, her father is the lawyer, and he defends this black man against like completely frivolous charges, and it's sort of about the importance of one person doing what they can to try to make the world better, even if what they're doing is ultimately hopeless. So Atticus is a very valorized figure in literature. He's very beloved. I mean, my best friend's cat is named Atticus after Atticus Finch, which happened before this book came out. But anyway, I think she still stands by that, by the way. But so anyway, he's a really beloved figure, and what happened a few years ago, there was this big hoopla with the Harper Lee estate, because Harper Lee, who I believe has since died, at the time had been a recluse. That, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird was her only book. She hadn't released anything, but there was some sense that there were people getting hold of her estate, and they were going to try to kind of capitalize off of some of her previously published work. If I'm getting any of the timeline of this wrong, please forgive me, because I didn't think to look that up before I did this. This is just sort of my memory of the literary news at the time. But eventually it was, kind of the outcome of all of that was that we did get this book from the estate, which was Go Set A Watchman. Harper Lee, I believe, was still alive when this was released. And the kind of what we've understood this to be is the first pass at those characters, but the narrator is no longer a child talking about her father. She's actually a grown woman who's moved to New York, comes back to Alabama, and essentially gets into sort of a conflict with her father as she realizes that he may not be as perfect or as noble as she'd always believed him to be, especially with respect to some of the race stuff. So this was very controversial at the time because it was sort of like, okay, how do we then think about the Atticus that we all know and love from To Kill a Mockingbird in light of this information from Go Set a Watchman. Kind of like how, you know, should we set this aside because this was like the discarded first draft? Do you take this into your understanding of Atticus, reading back into the original book? Kind of what is the right response to this new project that has sort of kind of dubious origins in terms of should this ever have even been published, or there's just sort of like a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion at the time. I purposely did not read it at the time because I didn't want my impression of this book to be kind of just like completely sullied by all of the chatter happening around it. So I wanted to kind of come to it with like fresh eyes and a fresh perspective insofar as I'm able to. And I'm very glad that I did that. So if you have not read this book, I can tell you that I think it's safe to get back in the water if what you've been worried about is that you didn't want to be too colored by all of that kind of drama or whatever. I think I was able to approach this like with as fresh of eyes as I could in light of the fact that I knew all of that had happened. And I was kind of surprised pleasantly, mostly, about my response to this book. Now, I'm gonna tell you from the jump, I gave this 3 stars. I don't think this is a novel. And I think reading this makes me appreciate back in the day Harper Lee and her editors even more, because this should have been a novella, probably. There's a lot of notes towards a really strong short story or novella in here. There's just not enough, I don't think, to bring this together as a novel in a sufficiently cohesive fashion, much less a novel that I believe is broken into 7 different parts, something like that. That feels really unnecessary to me, and I felt like that was just trying to like kind of flesh things out. There was a lot of sort of like book stuffing that I felt in this. So like from an editorial perspective and kind of this as a work of literature, do I think that this is anywhere close to as good as To Kill a Mockingbird? No, like not even in the same ballpark in terms of like literary achievement. But that being said, I enjoyed the hell out of my time reading this. So it was sort of the opposite response that I had to Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, because that was a book that I was like, I see why this is a great piece of literature. I can see why it's like why people admire it and talk about it, but I just don't really like this. I'm not really connecting with it. And this was sort of the opposite. I can totally see all the critiques that went into this. When I was on Goodreads, I thought, oh, Roxane Gay, I thought she summed up a lot of just sort of my feelings about this as a book. But in terms of this as just like a thing that I was reading and was I enjoying it or not, I was enjoying it. Harper Lee's writing, I just think is beautiful. And this makes me really, really sad that we never got a Harper Lee short story collection, because I would have read the hell out of it. And I really, again, I think that if this had been a short story or novella, it would have been a really remarkable one, especially in light of the final novel that we got out of To Kill a Mockingbird, because I really like that this complicates who Atticus is. And I like that this is exploring the dynamics between fathers and daughters in a way that I don't think we always get to see in literature. I would love to see more of that. You know, my father recently passed, and like I actually ended up finishing this the day before his funeral, and you know, it made me really emotional, and maybe that colored some of my perspective just because I've been thinking about that a lot, but it also made me think like, yeah, I wish that we had I would love to see more of that relationship explored in literature, fathers and daughters, because it is a complicated relationship. And if you grow up in the type of culture that the South is, where there's a really big emphasis placed on the father-daughter relationship, like that scene is very important, and there's like this emphasis on like kind of, at least traditionally, that's going away obviously, but it's still sort of baked in, I think, some of our kind of social mores, but there's this very big emphasis on sort of like the patriarch, and like especially with his daughters, like the idea of being a daddy's girl is a very big thing. I mean everywhere, but in the South it has specific kind of social connotations. Anyway, I would love to see that relationship explored more, and I was happy to have a book that was a lot of what its project was. I really liked the piece with her and the man that she has had romantic involvement with from her hometown, and kind of exploring the dynamics of she's been off in the big city and he's at home, and their expectations and the sort of push-pull there, I thought was really interesting. And yeah, ultimately, I just like that this is a book that kind of addresses a lot of the critiques that have been made about To Kill a Mockingbird over the years in terms of like this sort of white savior figure, and I actually really like that this complicates that, and I think mitigates it in a lot of ways, because To Kill a Mockingbird is told through the eyes of a child, and this is told through the eyes of a grown woman, and I think that we're able to get a different perspective on systemic racial attitudes that even individuals, as they try to combat them, are not always successful in doing that. And so I really like this book a lot, to be honest with you. So in terms of just like spoiler-free review, my thoughts, I think that this is totally worth reading. You may not like it because, like I said, plot is light on the ground here. I don't think it necessarily works that well as a book, but if you like Harper Lee's writing, and this was just such a reminder to me of what a good just technician she is. She just is a good author. She knows how to put a sentence together in a really compelling way. If you like her authorial voice, if you like her writing, if you love To Kill a Mockingbird, I think this is certainly worth your time. Go in with, I think, reasonable expectations about what a discarded first draft of a beloved novel could really be. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's reasonable to kind of temper your expectations in that respect, but if you do, I think that there's a lot to enjoy here and a lot to take away, and I leave this this left me enjoying To Kill a Mockingbird more because I think it throws into even sharper relief the fact that we have a narrator with a very specific angle on things in To Kill a Mockingbird, and I think that that's not bad. Do you know what I mean? I think it kind of even shows what Harper Lee was doing in that book and kind of her mastery in doing it even more, because if this was where she sees Atticus going, that does color things of how Scout is narrating things in To Kill a Mockingbird even more. You know what I mean? So I actually think it's totally worth your time with the right expectations and the right mindset, and it's something I definitely would recommend, even though I ultimately did give it 3 stars, which means it wasn't like an amazing book. I still enjoyed it and would recommend it. That being said, overall, I would say Southern September was a success. I got 4 books off of my TBR that I have been wanting to get to, which is always good. I had kind of mixed success in terms of highs and lows, but I did have a real high. I mean, March is one of my favorite things I've read this year. It's something that I will definitely be referencing and recommending to people, so I think that was a success. I'm glad to have read Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, even if I didn't end up loving it. It did make me intrigued to try some of his fiction because I think that his voice might work for me better in fiction. Love in the Ruins was real low, but again, it got it off my TBR and kind of gave me some peace about, like, you know what, I don't think I need to read any more Walker Percy. I've read The Moviegoer, I enjoyed that one, and maybe I just need to leave it at that. So I think that was good. And then Go Set a Watchman was one that I have been wanting to get to for quite some time and wanted to give myself space to have my own opinion about it, so I feel good that I kind of waited long enough to have my own reaction to it, and it was an enjoyable reading experience for me. So I enjoyed Southern September, all things considered, and definitely am looking forward to potentially doing this again next year if I have enough kind of material on my TBR that I think it kind of warrants it. So yeah, that is my review of Go Set a Watchman. Definitely feel free to let me know what you thought about that book in the comments, because I know that it elicited a lot of really strong reactions from people, positive and negative. So definitely let me know about that, and let me know if you have any thoughts about Southern September writ large. But anyway, I think that will do it. Thanks for joining me for this little journey, this little TBR journey. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, including my Goodreads information. So if you ever want to know what I think about a book before I do a review, you should follow me there. But yeah, I think that'll do it. Hope you're having a great one, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!